Access 2007 Table Properties. In a previous nugget, we talked about how important tables are. They're the foundation of our data within our Access databases, and data types help us to control the amount and the type of data that we collect in our tables. Well, we're going to take that a step further here by modifying the properties. In this nugget, we're going to discuss how changing the field size, adding an input mask, having some validation rules really can prevent garbage from being entered into your database. It also gives you some control over capacity planning because you'll have an idea of the type of data, the amount of data that you're allowing to be added on a per record basis. We're also going to help our users out by having some default options for data that we commonly see in our fields, and we're going to index this information as well so that we'll have more quick queries. We'll see that information retrieved a lot more quickly from our tables. And of course, these aren't the only properties that exist. We'll take a look at all the table properties that you'll see in Design View of an Access table. Well, let's go ahead and start Access. It's pinned right here in the Start menu. From the Welcome screen, I'll launch our Zoo database. This is the database we've been using all along, and we have a few different types of tables that need to have some table properties configured. Let's go into Memberships. We know we want the Design View, so I'll right-click and select Design View right here from the context menu. This is our membership ID field that we have selected. It's our primary key because we can tell that by this primary key icon, and this is also selected. We preset it as an auto number because we want Access to just select that number and increment it by 1 for each record. This is what preserves uniqueness in our specific memberships table. Let's take a look at the field properties. Our field size for membership ID is long integer. That's the default when you have an auto number type. We have only really two choices: long integer, which allows us to hold numbers up to a little bit over 2 billion, so we can hold pretty many numbers in here. If we were to choose replication ID, that would be a globally unique identifier. In other words, no other table in this database would have the same auto number for the membership ID. We're fine with just selecting a long integer. And we've chosen membership ID as an auto number. It's going to increment it by 1, or we could have it randomly select our auto number. I like to have some system to this, so I'm going to leave it as increment. We have a caption here. Instead of seeing the field name membership ID with no space, as I explained before, this is helpful to have no space when you're behind the scenes doing some coding, some programming, because you don't have to wonder, well, where did I have that space? And it's kind of old school because systems used to not be able to use spaces in the field names. Now they can, but it's not pretty for our users to see this in labels for fields in our forms and our reports. So in our caption, I've already typed in membership space ID, and now all of our membership ID fields in any other object that's based off this table will display as a nice caption for our users. Now, I could have typed anything in here. I could have said account number, who's our members. It doesn't matter what you type, but it makes sense to make it similar to the name of the field. Because this is our primary key, it's indexed. It's our main index, which means that when this information is stored into the table, it's going to be reordered according to that auto number that's held within this field. Naturally, we don't want any duplicates because the point of this primary ID is to have a unique record, at least one unique field in our table. Our other choices, though, would be no, not indexed at all. Yes, index it, but we can have duplicates. Doesn't work for the primary key. In fact, if I selected that, I'd get an error. But it would make sense in another index, like maybe if we were indexing last name, something like that. I'll leave it as the default. We'll get into smart tags in a little bit. Text alignment just goes by the data type. Inherently, numbers are going to be aligned to the right and text will be aligned to the left, although we could choose on our own that we wanted it to be centered or distributed evenly within that field. I think that general is a fine way to go here. Let's move on to the last name field. Something that's neat about Access 2007 is it picked up the idea that all of our captions should be the same as the field name, simply with a space. So we don't have to go in there and change our captions anymore. It picked up on this pattern. Let's start from the beginning though. Our field size. Our data type up above is text. That means we can have any character, number, letter, or symbol. And we can have up to 255 characters in that field. Now, chances are there's not many last names that have 255 characters in them. I'll type 20 in there. That means if I have a last name that's longer than 20 letters, then it's just going to bump off. It's not going to accept that 21st letter. To tell you the truth, 20 might even be a little bit too large here, because what that means is I can have up to 20 characters. So if I have 1,000 records in my table times 20 potential characters, I could be increasing the size of my database immensely after a while. So that's one reason why you do field size. Another reason why you'd shrink the field size from the default is because now when I go and create a form, as you'll see later, or a report, when I add this field onto my form, I'm going to have a field that's 20 characters long. Of course, I could resize it so it's smaller, but it's going to start out as 20 characters, which might take up too much space on my precious real estate in my forms and my reports. Moving down, format we'll get to with a better type of data type, like number or currency or date and time. Input mask we'll get to a little bit later as well. We'll skip caption. Default value we'll get to, and validation rule, validation text we'll all get to. Now let's talk about required. No. When someone's adding a record into this table, they do not have to add a last name. Now, in my opinion, I want last names. I think it will be a garbage record. Garbage in, garbage out, if you've heard that term. It will be a garbage record if there's no last name, because that's really valuable when I'm looking at memberships. So I do want to change that to be required. Now, some other fields, maybe I don't need first names or the city or the phone number, of course. It depends on what type of data you're collecting, but this gives you a lot of control over not having garbage information being added into your tables. Allow zero length goes hand in hand with required. Allow zero length, I could change that to no, but because I'm requiring it, it's going to say, well, you can't have zero length in there anyway. In essence, that's a field with no characters. There's no length to the data that's being input into that field. They kind of go hand in hand here, and required will trump that. Indexed. No, I'm not indexing by last name, but it might make sense for me to add this as an index if I do a lot of queries, a lot of searches by last name. So I'll choose yes, duplicates, okay. You have to be careful with indexes, because the more indexes you have, although the quicker it is to retrieve information on a query, the longer it takes to store records in your database, because before everything can be put to bed, so to speak, Access has to look through and sort it and save it in that specific order. So you don't want to index every field in your table, just the ones where the most queries are done based off of that information. So it's a happy medium, and this might be something that you do change if you take a look at your tables, your queries, your reports, your forms, and you realize things are taking either a little bit too long to save or they're taking too long to query. Moving down, we have Unicode compression. This has to do with the type of character format that's stored. This is behind the scenes. Unicode allows for working with other languages and other character subsets within your database. So if you're using Unicode without compression, each character takes up a little bit more space than the typical amount. So you can use Unicode compression here if you're dealing with Unicode characters. IME mode is really if you're working with other languages. From here we see some Japanese types of items. Hiragana, katakana, these are both Japanese languages that exist. I'm not working with Japanese, so I don't want to worry about IME mode control or IME sentence mode. I don't really have to worry about this. Smart tags are something interesting here within Access, and because last name is a pretty common type of element that exists, Access is saying, do you want me to recognize this? When I see a date, a telephone number, a financial symbol, or a person name, since we're in the last name field, I'll select that. Access is saying, I can do some things for you. When I see this, I can allow you to send some mail to this last name, or schedule a meeting, or open the contact, or add to your contacts in Outlook. It's Microsoft's way of using many of their different Office products together to help you get your work done more efficiently. In my situation, I'm not going to take advantage of smart tags, although it might be a very good use of your database in the business environment. And text align is something we've talked about previously. Let's move down to another data type here. I have zip code, and you might think that it's weird that my data type for zip code is text. Here's the deal. I'll never do calculations on zip codes. I'm never going to have to look at this zip code as a number. Instead, I'm looking at it, in my case, as a 5-character string of, well, characters, because it's this pattern that we have in the United States. And as a good database designer, I don't want to accept 6 characters on accident or 3 characters on accident. So I'm going to leave zip code as text, and I can change my field size there to 5. Or because it's a text field, I can accept the dash, so I could go for that extended zip code that we're using now in the United States and accommodate for that field size. Phone number is similar in that I don't do calculations, so I'll use the data type of text. And I want to show you the input mask now. We know that phone numbers have a specific pattern. Usually we have parentheses around the area code, and then we have a dash in between our 3 digits and our last 4 digits. So an input mask will help us to prompt our users to add a number in the appropriate format. Access is very good about saying, you know what? I might mess this up for you, so save it now. Save your table now the way it looks, and then you can go into it and make those changes. It's saying, hey, some data might be lost. If I have information in this table already, some phone numbers, if it tries to update the pattern and change, lengthen or shorten the characters, it's saying, you know what, I might lose that. And this specifically is going back to my phone number field on my last name field, my zip code on my last name field, where I shortened the field size. It's saying once this is saved, I'm truncating any characters that you had beyond these field sizes that you've just set. Yes, that's fine with me. Now it's saying data integrity rules have been changed. Some of this data might not be valid for this new input mask that you're adding. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. It really wants to make sure because this data is such a sensitive, important piece to all of our business lives when we're setting it up, and Microsoft doesn't want us to mess up. Here are our specific input masks that we can choose. Notice phone numbers at the top of the list, but we have a couple other popular ones. And once you see the symbols that pop up at the end, you'll see that you can format your own if you have specific IDs that you'd like to add as an input mask that, of course, Microsoft doesn't recognize as something common. I'm going to try it out. When I clicked in this field, it showed it how it's going to appear in my tables when someone clicks in that field, and, of course, in any form or report that looks similar to that. See how easy that was? I'll click next. It's not saving this data. It's just setting me on my way in my wizard. This is the default input mask. This is the code behind that. And 0s mean required, 9 means optional. The placeholder character is this underscore right here. I could change that to an @ symbol if I wanted to. I think that the underscore is easier on the user's eyes, but of course it's up to you, however you'd like that to be. I'll choose next. When this data is stored in the table, when no one's looking at it, do I really want to have these extra characters in there taking up space, or do I want to just store it as a raw number, and then when this data is brought up and displayed in forms, it will format it with the parentheses? I'll save some space here, and I'll choose Finish. Now here it is. This is what my input mask looks like, and we can test this out. I'll click Save once again and pop back into my view. Now I've just added a phone number here, and I know I haven't been very creative with my phone numbers in this, but I wouldn't want to give away anybody's phone number. 555-1212, and it works just fine. I don't really want to save this record, so if I press escape, it clears out that information. I press escape again, and it's in essence saying, okay, Access, never mind. We'll go back into our table view. Now, for my phone field, since as you noticed I have the same phone number, I could do a default for that, but let's move on down since we've looked at all the other items to currency. Now, I mentioned we'd look at format in a moment. So my format is currency. Here, we could use euros, we could use percentages, we could use scientific notation if that's what suited us. I think that currency with a US dollar sign is just fine for me. And of course, as we know, if you live in the United States, you have two decimal places that follow it, which is the auto. But for some reason, if you wanted no decimal places, you didn't want to look at the cents, or you wanted more decimal places, you could certainly do that. I would like to add a default value here because for new people that add records into my table, I want to give them a break. Most of our Zoo memberships cost $75, so why not just put 75 in here to start with, and any new record is going to show that information. Of course, they can override that and put a different value in there if they need to, and the default value will not go back and change any record that exists already. It's just a suggestion for new records that someone is inputting. My registration date is date and time. I have a default format, but I could choose to have it spelled out in long date. I could have it just show the time if I'd like to. I'm going to keep it as the, actually, I'll do medium date so we can see what that looks like. And let's choose a default value here as well. Most people, when they're adding it in, were on the ball. They add it in the same day that the registration for the membership occurs. So I'd like to set Access to show today's date for each record. So that's date. It's a little function, date open parenthesis, close parenthesis. It calls a built-in function that exists within Access. If I wanted to get more fancy, I can click this button here. The three dots on this button indicate that a dialog box will open for you, and this is often referred to as the Build button because the expression builder pops up here. This is my expression that I've created, but notice I have all these other operators that I could choose, all sorts of logical operators, and there's built-in functions as well. There's date and time functions, there's all sorts of different items, and there is, of course, a help button. I'm not going to take you through how to work with every single one of these expressions, but if you're creating some pretty fancy databases, it's not a bad idea to go into this expression builder and see what you can do because it can really help you out in the long run. I'm going to click Cancel to close out of this. And I say go into the expression builder later because you'll have many opportunities. We had it here in the default value, but when we're creating calculated fields, when we're working in forms and reports and queries, we can also launch this expression builder to help us create some function. We're going to come back to these items that we haven't discussed yet, but this one has to do with dates. Show date picker. This is a new thing. That was that little icon that looked like a calendar, and when we clicked on it, we had a graphical calendar where we could click next, 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 and actually select on the date that we wanted to show. And our users will be able to use this when they're in forms. So it can be very helpful for data input. I'd like to show the date picker for dates, which was the default, instead of never. But sometimes I may just not want to see that little calendar icon appear at all. That is all we're going to do here. Let's go back and test out what our defaults look like. So I'd like to add a new record. I can go Records to New here. You might recall we have this little New button as well. So New, I'll go Tab, Tab, Tab. I'm really not going to add everything in here. We already tested out our phone number. There, our membership appears as a currency, and our date appears already, and here's that date picker I was talking about. Of course, I could always override this if I wanted to make it $150, and if I wanted to change that date to July 7th, 07, 2007, if I wanted to. Oh, it's telling me that I have a required field for last name. Remember, we set that up, and I'm trying to add this record in when I hit enter because this was the last field in the record. It tried to input this in the table, and it realized I broke a rule. So it's telling me that I have to go back and add a value. I'll choose OK. Notice though that when I did type in 7/7/2007, it put it into this format. So it's nice. When you're editing, you don't have to type it out, 07-JUL-07. Let's go back here, though, and add a last name into this field. So we'll add Miller in there. That's the only required field. I know I'm breaking rules. This is garbage, but it did accept it. So don't really want to click in this field because it'll say, hey, you're in a new record, you have to add a last name, and that can go on and on and on. I'll go back into view here. We're all set, but I would like to show you one more item in a different table. Let's go to our food orders table. I'll right click and choose design view again. I would like to set up a validation rule. As it turns out, if I don't have a quantity in my food orders, it's junk. What good is an order if I don't know how many are to be ordered? So I'd like to set a validation rule. I want these orders to be greater than 0. Now I could go into that expression builder again and get very, well, greater than 0 and less than 25, whatever would make sense, but I'll just stick with greater than 0. I'll save this. It's saying, you know what, you just changed something. You might have some quantities with 0. If that's true, hey, you're breaking some rules and data might not be valid. Do you want the existing data to be tested for the new rules? If I knew I had 0 values and I didn't want to go through the time, I'd choose no. I don't have any 0 values. I can choose next or fine, and that's no problem. I'll go back into this table view and add a new record. What's my quantity? 0. I'm breaking the rules. When I press tab, it's saying, hey, 1 or more values are prohibited by the validation rule greater than 0. Okay, I know what that means, but there are some people out there that might read this error and go, what? Click OK, and then try to go on over and over again. I'm going to click escape twice so that I'm not adding a new record, and I'll go back into design view. So to make it easier on my users, I'm going to type some validation text that will appear in that error dialog box that'll make sense to them. So I'll say quantity must be greater than 0. That's pretty straightforward. That's pretty clear. Quantity must be greater than 0. Save it, view, quantity 0, tab. Quantity must be greater than 0. Oh, okay, that's my problem. I get it. So if I put a 5 in there and press tab, it accepts it just fine. Again, I don't really want to add this record, so I'll escape it. I'll go back into view here. Now, the last thing about this quantity field is let's talk about the data type number. Remember we talked about field size with text? Well, you also have field size with numbers, and the same goes here. You can really save space, but numbers have more confusing field sizes. We've got byte, which allows us to have a number up to 255. So not good for some fields. Like that would be horrible for zip code, right? Because a zip code has more than 255. If you were to look at it, in Arizona, it would be 85,260 for my zip code. Another good reason to have zip codes as text. So byte might work for quantity. Integer, this allows for numbers in the 32,767 range, so it limits it there. Long integer allows you to have about 2 billion, a number that's about as large as 2 billion. Byte integer and long integer do not allow you to have decimal places in there. However, single, double, and decimal do. Single is, of course, the smallest, so if your decimal places aren't going to be very large, choose that one. It allows you to take up 4 bytes worth of space. Double allows you to use 8 bytes worth of space, and decimal allows you to use 12 bytes worth of space. And we did talk about replication ID. There is one catch though. When we set up this vendor field name, we used the lookup wizard and we tied this vendor field name actually to this vendor's table. So it was showing the company name and a drop-down menu, and it was storing the vendor ID in that field. So our data type appeared as number instead of as lookup wizard, because the lookup wizard realized, oh, well, we're storing a number data type. Let's give it the data type of number. It by default goes to long integer, but if it is a linked field, if you've used the lookup to choose a primary key from another field that's auto number, it must really stay as long integer to accommodate that. Double and long integer are the most common settings, and if you're joining this field to an auto number field in a many-to-one relationship, this field must be a long integer. So we cannot change this specific data type because it's tied in a relationship to our vendor's field. It's a many-to-one relationship because there's one vendor in our vendor field, but there may be many of that vendor in this related table. Let's revisit indexes one more time. We know we have an index on our food order ID, but as it turns out, on our food orders, we do a lot of searches by order date. So I can set an index here for that. Yes, we want duplicates in there. We also have on our Design tab here the Indexes dialog box. From here, we can choose to have a number of different indexes. So from my order date, I can have a little bit more control. We already do have control of primary and unique down here. However, ignore nulls. We could actually say, are we allowed to have records that have a 0 in it included in the index? Do we really want to store that? Yes or no. Also, we could, if we wanted to, have an index that has up to 10 fields involved in it. So maybe we want to store data by order date, and also we want to store it by vendor. And so when this data is arranged, when it's stored in that table, it's indexed, it's sorted in essence in storage mode by order date and vendor, but it would just go under this one index name, order date. So we could have up to 10 fields involved in one index. Again, could make for more expedient retrieval of records, could take longer to save that data. You always want to keep that in mind. And how do we want to store it in the background? Ascending or descending order. I'm actually not going to do this, so I'll just select this, press delete on my keyboard, and click X. So I do still have this indexed. Yeah, I'm fine with that. It's not going to cause us too much trouble. Note over here it does say press F1 for help on indexed fields. Anytime you're in field properties, pressing F1 on your keyboard is going to launch specific help regarding the property. And of course you always have this button in the upper right hand corner for help. The interface has changed, of course, in 2007, but help is still very, very easy to find, and I think it's gotten a lot better over the years. The last thing I'd like to show you about table properties is the property sheet up here. Again, we're on the Design tab, looking at the ribbon. The Property Sheet button gives us the overall table properties. We have a lot of these that we've talked about, but we have some more specific. Do we want to save views on SharePoint? Remember, SharePoint is a new Microsoft product that allows collaboration off of a server. So people don't have to get into your Access databases, but they can get into the information that comes from your Access databases. If I have a number of tables that are related, I could choose to see the sub data sheets or the related tables in my table view, and do I want to see them expanded or not? If they're not expanded, there'll be a little plus that I could click on to expand. A lot of these are pretty straightforward. How much space should your sub data sheet take up? Do you want to see it from left to right? Do you need a description? What's the default view when you open a table? Do you want it to go into data sheet? Do you want it to be a pivot table or a pivot chart? Do you want a validation rule or validation text overall for the table? Are there specific fields you want to filter by so when it's opened all at once, you're going to only see some of the records? Should it be sorted in a particular order when it's opened up? Well, what's your sub data sheet name? Are there any child fields or master fields that you'd like to link from other locations? When you load this table, do you want to filter it? Yes or no? When you do load this, do you want it to be ordered or sorted in a specific order? When you're talking about the underlying SQL code structured query language that a lot of other databases are based off of, like Oracle and Microsoft SQL Server, the term order is the same thing as sort. It's order by in the SQL query language. Well, that is our property sheet. The very last thing I'd like to show you here is this nice button, Test Validation Rules. If I click that, I don't think I had any validation rules. Well, I guess I did for quantity. It's saying, hey, it's going to test the table's record and field validation rules, your required, your allow zero lengths, for all that data in the table, just to make sure you're setting rules that are going to work with your data. I'll choose yes. You must save the table. Do you want to save the table now? Yes, of course. Look at that. All our data was valid for all the rules. Lots of new, efficient changes that Access 2007 has added in there that can really speed up your process and give you better, more stable structures here within Access. Well, let's go ahead and review what it is that we covered in this nugget. It was all about table properties. And some of the most prominent things we did was we set the field size to save hard drive space and allow us to do better capacity planning. Our input masks allow us to set up patterns for typical numbers that we add in there, like social security numbers, phone numbers, zip codes, and you can even create your own using the symbols that Access has to help you out. Default also is going to help your users by giving them a prompt or at least giving an idea of what data typically goes in that field. We don't want garbage in our database, so we can set up validation rules and validation text to better explain that. Also, to prevent garbage, we can have required fields in our database. Indexes are how data is stored. If we don't have indexes, then when you do a query, Microsoft Access, and all databases for that matter, do a whole table scan and look through all of the records that exist. Well, there are many different properties that you can set within Access tables. Just make sure you open up the table you want to work with and you go into Design View. Keep in mind, help is only a click away. That's either a click on that blue question mark button or F1 on your keyboard. Well, I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.